Hi, welcome to another video. So I want to talk about three models right now: Claude Opus 4.7, GPT-5.4, and Kimi K2.6 Code. And I think the comparison is actually pretty simple once you stop looking at hype and just focus on what these things are like to use for real work. I will start with the clearest part first. For most things, I think GPT 5.4 is the best. If I want the safest default for backend work, debugging, planning, instruction following, tool use, longer multi-step tasks, and just general coding reliability, GPT 5.4 is the one I trust the most right now. That is basically where I stand. It feels more complete. It feels better at actually finishing the job. It feels better at not getting lost. And it feels like the most consistently useful model overall. So if you asked me which model I would pick as the default for most coding tasks, especially serious coding tasks, then yes, GPT 5.4 is my answer. Now, I do think there is one area where GPT 5.4 is not necessarily my favorite, and that is frontend. It is still good. I am not saying it is bad, but if I am being honest, I think some of the others can feel nicer there. The front-end taste, the visual direction, the feel of the generated UI, that part is not where GPT 5.4 most clearly wins for me. And that is where Kimmy K256 code may actually be the best overall for a lot of people. Not necessarily the absolute best raw model in every category. For me, that is still GPT 5.4, but the best overall package when you factor in cost. Yeah, Kimmy K256 code may honestly be the best overall there. That is the distinction. GPT 5.4 is the best for most things. Kimmy K256 code may be the best overall if you care about value. And value matters a lot. Because if a model is a little bit worse in a few categories, but still excellent, much faster in practice, and easier on your wallet, then for a lot of developers, that is the smarter choice. And I think that is exactly why Kimmy is so compelling. It also works best, in my opinion, inside its own Kimmy CLI. That is not surprising. Their own CLI is clearly built around the model, the pacing, the tool calling, and the workflow they actually want. So, if I want the best Kimmy experience, I'm not really looking for some awkward wrapper first. I'm using the environment it was clearly designed for. So, there is that. Now, let's come to Opus 4.7. And honestly, this is where my take is the least exciting. I do think Opus 4.7 is better than before. I am not denying that. But I still do not think it is a meaningful enough improvement. Front-end is fine. That is not the issue. If you want nice UI output, landing pages, components, polished screens, and that kind of thing, Opus is okay. The issue is still back-end coding. That is where it keeps disappointing me. Once the work gets messy, weird bugs, APIs, refactors, infra, database logic, debugging across multiple files, I still do not feel like Opus is where I want it to be. It still has that same frustrating habit of overthinking the wrong things, taking too long, and making me feel like I have to supervise it more than I should. And that becomes even more annoying when it costs the same. That is the part I keep coming back to. If you're going to keep premium pricing, then I want a clearer jump in usefulness. I do not think Opus 4.7 gives me that jump. So, for me, Opus 4.7 is in this weird spot where it is obviously capable, but not compelling enough. Now, there is one thing that makes Opus much more interesting, and that is Verdent. Verdent now has Opus 4.7 access. And if I had to use Opus 4.7, I would much rather use it there than in Claude Code. That is not even close. Verdent gives Opus a much better environment. You get parallel tasks, isolated workspaces, better planning, cleaner reviews, and a much better way to keep multiple streams of work moving without everything turning into chaos. So, if the question is, what is the best way to use Opus 4.7 right now, then Verdant is a very good answer. It gives Opus structure, it gives it a cleaner workflow, it makes it easier to stay in flow, and that matters, because Claude Code limits are still really bad. The 5-hour limits are atrocious. So, even if you like the model, the surrounding experience can still make it hard to recommend. Verdant helps with that. It gives Opus a better home, and I do want to give Verdant real credit for that. But, and this is the important distinction, Verdant making Opus easier to use does not suddenly make Opus my top recommendation. It just makes the Opus story less annoying. It just makes the Opus story less annoying. That is very different. So when I zoom out, my ranking is basically this. If I want the strongest general pick for most things, GPT 5.4. If I want the most interesting overall value play, especially because the front end is great and the back end is much better than I expected, Kimmy K2.6 Code. And if I absolutely want to use Opus 4.7, then I would do it in Verdant, because Verdant makes that workflow make much more sense. That is pretty much the whole story. Now, I also want to mention one more thing about GPT 5.4, because this is part of why I rate it so highly. It is not just strong in one narrow way. It is strong across the board: coding, reasoning, tool use, agentic work, computer use, longer context. It just feels like the most complete model right now. That is why it wins for me as the default. But then once cost enters the picture, the conversation changes. And that is where Kimmy becomes very hard to ignore. Because if Kimmy K2.6 Code is close enough on the things that matter, and in some cases better on front end, and also gives you a better cost to performance ratio, then for a lot of people, it may actually be the smarter overall choice. So I think the honest conclusion is this. GPT 5.4 is the best for most things. Kimmy K2.6 Code may be the best overall if you care about lower cost and still want something that is genuinely good, and Opus 4.7 is still not something I would strongly recommend on the model alone, even though Verdant definitely makes it more appealing. So if I had to summarize my actual recommendation very simply, it would be this. If you just want the best general model, use GPT 5.4. If you want the best overall balance of quality, speed, front-end strength, and cost, Kimmy K2.6 Code is probably the one to watch. And if you're already a Verdant user and want to push Opus 4.7 as far as it can go, that is probably the best way to do it. Overall, it's pretty cool. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this video, consider donating through the Super Thanks option or becoming a member by clicking the Join button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye.